the reed. It sounds like a lot when I count them, but in actuality, I think it's pretty standard. So I measure the middle, right under the ears, and then the sides of the piece of shaped cane. And then I also measure the ends in the middle to make sure those are not thinner or thicker. I don't want them thinner because the fulcrum point on the staple will not be right. Then I measured at the thread, all 4 of them. That's super important for me to see a measure of balance and symmetry. As far as for anything unusual that I maybe do, I use a slightly narrower and slightly thinner plaque. That might be unusual. It's now available as the Strommen plaque at HDR, or at least one of them is. So this is to make sure the sides aren't being pushed apart when I use it. Most plaques are these days between 0.25 and 0.30 hundredths in thickness. And I have 2 variations of the plaques. One is 0.20, and then the other is 0.23, which is what's on the market. The shape helps me keep the sides together, and it's really hard for me to go back to a thicker or a wider plaque now that I've used the new ones. It's also important for me how I use the plaque in finishing stages, where I put the plaque in, and how I use it as a guide to the knife. So that's another thing that's important to me in basically my process, but with the equipment as well.
I'm actually really curious about your micrometer measurements for all of those spots that you mentioned.
I'm happy to speak about it. So basically, I mentioned that in the middle, that's pretty clear. And on the sides of the reed, or right under the ears, what would be the ears, but I take off the ears first. And then the ends, would be, I want to make sure I don't get it in the place where the clip is, might be holding the cane, because that may have a slight indent. So it would be, maybe 4 millimeters from the end or something of the piece of shaped cane. And then the string measurements are really important to me for a sense of balance, how the reed will close on the plaque. Those are about maybe a 1/2 inch from the bottom. You can measure it depending how far you tie the reed on your staple. Those, to me, again, are a measure of a balance of the quadrants, and they will affect how the reed closes and the stability. So I want those in a certain ballpark of the side measurement and the middle measurement. And of course, we have variation of the side measurements in the middle. So it's that, it's dependent on those as well.
What do you look for in the ideal reed?
Well, that's a loaded question. So I'm going to give you my simplistic answer to start. Basically, I want the reed to meet my musical artistic vision. That sounds simplistic, but there are different reeds for different needs, and I do feel that way. I don't want to force a reed to become something it's maybe not destined for. I have a reed that might work well for Brahms, but I'm playing, some Baroque repertoire. I probably won't try to make that reed into that. I'll just make another reed. If I'm more specific in my description, I like this an acronym, RIT. So response/healthy resistance, intonation, and tone. So then if I go in more detail from that, response to me is how the tone emerges. And healthy resistance is how much effort to keep the reed going. When there's a healthy balance, to me, that equals cushion. To me, I like that feel of cushion. I do want something that I can emerge very easily without much work, and the same with the diminuendo. And yet I need something to blow against so that when I crescendo, the reed still has depth and broadens rather than getting pointed or pressed or one-dimensional. And some of that healthy resistance I can blow against myself just simply by production, but I do want some built into the reed. Intonation, to me, that's a balance of stability and flexibility, which I like the word malleability, to be malleable. I want to have a pitch floor so I can play to the bottom of the tone, as in a place where the pitch won't drop. I also value having somewhat of a pitch ceiling. And it's in some ways the same thing, relates to healthy resistance. I want a lid on the pitch. I don't want it to just fly away. So back to the acronym response, intonation, and then tone. Tone, some adjectives I might say: clear, round, and ringing. I love those qualities for articulation because that's when I don't feel we can really manipulate the reed when we're articulating. So if those are built in the reed with articulation, then I think I'll be okay. Clear, round, and ringing, or resonant. I'm hot on the word resonant this year. I want the tone to deepen and broaden when I go and make a crescendo and become more three-dimensional or tubular. And I want as much tone as I can have for little work. Isn't that what we all want?
Of course.
So in general, I want the reed to do as much as it can do on its own. I want to put my energies into the music. I don't want to have to gather the tone. So less gathering the tone, less pitch adjustment, and I want the response to be predictable. So for the reed to do as much on its own. I also want a reed that allows me to be at my ideal production. One of my values is to be able to play a reed with my jaws apart or have space in the mouth, because that to me gives me depth and it gives me ring. It helps with articulation and it helps with vibrato. And with ideal production, I want to be able to have an embouchure that can be firm but flexible, so it can be mobile and take care of the pitch needs and the color needs. I also want the reed to be able to be in a place where I can vary the airspeed for dynamic and colors. Those are some of the needs for my ideal production and what I'm looking for in a reed. I also believe that each of us has a different reed window, or our specific reed window. The reed window is the parameter of reed qualities that help us to be at our best. My window may be slightly different from a colleague, or even slightly different from a student. And I think the key is to find what this window is, or the recipe, and be able to achieve it with the most consistency. I believe sometimes it's more important to know the reed than to have a perfect reed. I think if we know what we need to do to meet the reed, it may prove to be more successful sometimes rather than waiting for the perfect reed. And, we're going to need to do some adjustments. So I also need a reed where the sides hold themselves tightly together all the way to the top of the reed. For me, the best ways to achieve these qualities are two things. One is to take the greatest care in the early stages of the reed to give it the most potential to be successful in the finishing stages. So the early stages are super important to me. I also believe in using the objective reed test, so I'm really big on that.
Do you think we could dive a little bit more deeply into those objective reed tests?
Surely. The use of the objective tests is at the core of my reed-making philosophy. To me, it saves time, gives objectivity, gives a more detailed assessment, and is confirming throughout the process, so there's less worry and angst. To me, it's one of the best diagnostic tools to simplify what's a complex art and science of our craft. So the tests. I'll describe the tests and the process of using them first. Then I'll go into more detail, at least with the reed tests. And then the oboe tests are simply confirming of the reed tests, so those can be found in our American Reed chapter. So I use 4 sets of tests to analyze and then build in the qualities I desire in a reed. Each of these has specific tests within themselves. The 4 tests I use are looks, read alone tests, oboe tests, and these correlate directly with the reed tests, and last of all, playing and scraping for particular needs, such as a piece, a hall, or a situation. In making the reed, I primarily evaluate and work from the tip down, tip, transition, plateau, back, and I round robin my scraping to keep the reed in balance as I reduce it. This helps me keep perspective. The process I use, and basically the process I think John Mack used, is I evaluate the reed thoroughly by looks and correct all that can be done by eye until the reed approaches finishing weight and makes a fluent sound. Then I use the objective read alone tests, and there are 4 of those, to further evaluate along with the confirmation from the looks, or what I see. Then I scrape to correct problems the read alone tests disclose until I need more clues. I then proceed to the oboe tests. I confirm these with the looks and the reed tests and scrape till the reed has the qualities I desire. Each reed and oboe test correlates to a specific place on the reed to scrape to produce the quality I'm trying to get. To me, this is magical and systematic. I usually make a reed probably 90 to 95% by the reed tests, and then maybe about 5% by the oboe tests, and only 1 to 5% by playing and scraping for specific needs. So the specifics of the tests. First of all, looks. I analyze the reed thoroughly dry for the most detailed evaluation. Then, before I soak the reed to do the reed tests, I use what's called the close on the plaque test, which is detailed in our chapter. This shows me how the 4 quadrants of the reed are interacting with each other to create balance and stability. When I'm looking at the reed, I can already predict how it will likely function since I know what each part of the reed affects if it's scraped. The diagram guiding what each part affects is in our book on page 120. So after looks, the second set of tests is on the reed alone with the noises, and there are 4 of those. They take about 10 seconds to do, and I do all of them in a row. They are what John Mack's noises sounded like. I'll do them in slow motion. Though I get a lot of information from the string crow, the other 3 tests give me a world of information beyond that. And they're also valuable to confirm the aspects of the crow. Each test correlates to place on the reed to analyze, and the oboe test correlates to a similar place, as I've said before. So the 4 reed tests. These are also detailed in the book on page 126 in the objective tests grid, and followed by the prose to describe them. So I analyze from the tip down on the reed when I'm doing the tests. And the first test is the aspirated test at the tip. It sounds like. It's like a who syllable to me. I start with